Harry Potter, the boy who lived.
Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, welcome back to my video game review series. So those of you who have been following my channel will know that recently I've been reviewing every Harry Potter video game. I reviewed the PS1 Potter games, as well as some of the 6th generation versions. In my last review I talked about The Prisoner of Azkaban, which is actually my personal favourite game in the Harry Potter series. Today we're going to be looking at the Goblet of Fire, released in 2005, developed by EA. So those of you who saw my previous Harry Potter reviews will know that up until this point, the Harry Potter games have been relatively consistent in quality, and there had been some gradual and some minor improvements as the series progressed. The PS1 games were solid action-adventure platformers that were very fun and atmospheric, with plenty of level and location variety, if a bit simplistic. The PS2 and Xbox versions were much bigger games with more of an open world, sandbox style, and plenty of interesting RPG elements. In previous games, exploration and experimentation was encouraged, and the games, in spite of their flaws, were just generally pretty good games and I thoroughly enjoyed them. With Azkaban being my personal favourite game in the series, and with that game practically perfecting the open world sandbox format, you would have expected them to continue that trend. Well, unfortunately someone at EA thought it was a good idea to throw that formula away completely, and instead make Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire a generic linear action game with little to no innovation, making Goblet of Fire, in my personal opinion, the most disappointing game in the entire Harry Potter series. So the game is a third-person action-adventure game based on the Goblet of Fire book and movie. As I mentioned already, the game is very different to the previous installments. The open-world RPG elements are gone, along with the platforming. There is practically nothing about this game, in terms of its overall gameplay mechanics, that are in any way similar to the previous games in the series. The game starts out with a brief cutscene introducing you to the game's story.
Perhaps if we were to do it without the boy.
Speaking of story, however, there really isn't much of it this time. You get a very short, poorly animated cutscene before each level. These couldn't be any less interesting if they tried. They usually consist of a short voiceover introducing you to the level.
This evening, Professor Moody placed the Triwizard Cup within the maze.
Except pretty much everything in the game is presented to you completely without context, and if you had never seen the movie, then you would have absolutely no idea what's going on. The game starts in the aftermath of the Quidditch World Cup game between Ireland and Bulgaria. Harry, Ron and Hermione will have to escape the area and reach the portkey.
What is that?
It's the Dark Mark, Harry! It's his mark!
Voldemort.
Get to the portkey!
This gives you a very brief introduction into the overall gameplay mechanics. Once the first level is over, you get to attend Defense Against the Dark Arts class with Professor Mad-Eye Moody, who sounds suspiciously more like Hagrid in this game for some reason.
Those blue beams will help you cast more powerful spells. Now go through that door to the next room.
This is supposed to act as a tutorial, introducing you to the game's controls, combat and spellcasting. Weirdly, this is actually the only class you get to attend in the entire game. And I don't know about you guys, but to me that's very disappointing. Moody basically gives you an introduction on how to use spells and teamwork to traverse the environment. Just like in the last game, in addition to playing as Harry, you can also play as his best friends Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger. Although for some reason they removed the ability to switch between them at any time during gameplay. In this game you instead have to choose between them at the start of each level. They are all pretty much the same and the differences between them are purely cosmetic. I mentioned earlier that the open world style has been taken away. Instead you get 8 individual levels in the menu. You do get a fair bit of variety in terms of the visual aesthetics of each level. For example, you get a level in the Dark Arts class, a level on the rooftops of Hogwarts, a level in the Prefect's bathroom where you have to find the dragon egg, a level in the Herbology greenhouses. You also get to experience each of the Triwizard tasks, and again, these couldn't be any more disappointing. There are only 8 levels in the entire game, and several of them can be completed in minutes, making the game criminally short. Not to mention, these levels are boring beyond all belief. You traverse the levels by using various spells to defeat enemies and remove obstacles in your path. You have several different spells to unlock. You can defeat most enemies by simply charming them with your standard attack spell. You can also learn Wingardium Leviosa for levitating enemies. This can also be used to pick up and remove objects. Certain objects will be too big and heavy for you to lift on your own, and your companions will need to assist you. You can also unlock Carpe Retractum for grappling onto things. You can use this to open doors and gates as well as to lower bridges. Again, some of these will be too big for you to handle yourself, and one of your companions will need to help you. You can also unlock Axio, which can be used to summon objects and pull them towards you, such as beans, pumpkin pasties, and challenge shields. You can learn Aqua Erupto, which can produce water that can be used to put out fires in the environment. You can also learn Herbificus, that grows certain plants. This can be used to make bridges and reach certain areas across water. You'll learn each of the spells as you progress through the game. Unfortunately, this method of traversing levels is a pain in the ass, mainly because the AI in the game is utterly atrocious. I mentioned before that you will need to rely on your companions to help you move certain obstacles out the way. Well, sometimes the AI will just bug out and they will completely lose it, and just start refusing to help you, and instead getting in your way. The AI is probably the worst thing about the game, because it just makes the game so much more frustrating and tedious. Speaking of tedium, I mentioned how the game is criminally short, at least in terms of its actual content, and that is true. Now, given how bad the game is, being short wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, but in order to pad the game out considerably longer, the developers made it so that in order to reach the next level, you will have to first obtain a certain amount of Triwizard shields. There are various ways to obtain these in each level, such as collecting 10 hidden challenge shields, completing certain tasks, or overcoming certain obstacles. This in itself isn't bad, but the problem is that you can only obtain one of these Triwizard shields at a time, and once you collect one of them, the level just ends immediately, meaning to reach the next level you will have to go back and complete the same boring level you just completed again. This is so boring and tedious. So yeah, the level design here is pretty awful, which is a shame because the graphics and visual style and aesthetic are pretty nice and the game doesn't look bad for the time. You get a bit of enemy variety. For example, you take on Dugbogs, Salamanders, Vampire Mosps, which are these annoying flying enemies that show up out of nowhere and ambush you, Grindylows in the underwater level. They also added those giant blast-ended Scroots from the book that weren't featured in the movie. They also show up in the maze just like in the book. I'm actually surprised they added those. That was quite a nice touch, I'm not gonna lie. So there are plenty of enemies, but not as many as in previous games. I mentioned before that you get to take part in the 3 Triwizard tasks, and yeah, those pretty much suck. First of all, you have the Dragon task. This is a flying level where you basically have to fly away from the dragon on rails, using Harry's broomstick, collecting as many beans and special boosts as you can along the way. And to be honest, it's nothing special, and it's about as generic and as linear as you can get. But for some reason I actually somewhat enjoyed it. I guess this level was just a break from the boring, repetitive and tedious gameplay of the other levels. Interestingly, this actually includes a scene that was cut from the movie where the dragon chases Harry through the Forbidden Forest. I actually found that quite funny. You also get an underwater level in Task 2. Again, this pretty much is on rails and it's very linear. You basically swim forward and shoot as many Grindylows and obstacles as you can. That's basically it. And finally you get the 3rd task in the maze, except it's not much of a maze since you get a trail of orange beans basically showing you the way to go. As I mentioned before, they added the giant blast-ended Scroots here, and you have to fight them. So yeah, the Triwizard tasks are very disappointing. At the very end of the game you get a short boss battle against Voldemort. This takes place in a graveyard just like in the movie. Unfortunately, this is one of the most poorly designed boss battles I have ever experienced. You basically have to defeat a bunch of skeletons, easy enough. Then you and Voldemort both cast a spell at each other, and this leads to you having to use the left thumbstick to direct the spell towards more skeletons and hazards in the environment. What's weird about this is that the game wants you to control both Harry and the spell at the same time, using the very same thumbstick. This makes absolutely no sense. It's not exactly difficult, it's just awkward and unresponsive. Very disappointing. Once you defeat Voldemort, that's it. You get another short, lame cutscene, then the game just ends. Just like that. So anticlimactic. Now the game does have some collectibles and a few features. For example, you once again collect Bertie Bott's every flavour beans scattered around each level. Speaking of beans, a lot of dialogue between the main characters in the game involves them.
Collect the beans. More beans. Over there. Beans.
Man, I swear Ron has like a bean addiction in this game or something. He's absolutely obsessed with them. He literally won't shut up about them. Even Hermione gets pissed off with this eventually.
Will you stop going on about beans, Ron?
Other than that, there isn't really much memorable dialogue in the game. The beans once again act as currency. You can use them to buy various upgrades that can be purchased from the menu. These upgrades are a welcome addition, but they feel a bit tacked on and unfinished. I never noticed a major difference after buying them. But I guess they had some replay value, if you ever want to replay the game, which I can't really see you wanting to do. There are also collectible statues and various hidden items in each level that can be collected. Not that I particularly want to go looking for them, but they are there for what it's worth. This game is just a massive disappointment from start to finish. Before you even start the game, you get a pretty major warning sign just by looking at the box art. In previous Harry Potter games, the cover would have original artwork made in the style of the game. This helped to differentiate the games from the movies, and it showed that the developers, at least on some level, had some passion for them. However, with this game, Daniel Radcliffe is on the cover. In fact, if you saw this game in a shop and didn't see the game console logo, you would probably assume that this is a DVD of the movie. It shows that unlike the previous games in the series, this is just a generic, half-arsed movie license game. Which is a shame because the game could have been great. As I mentioned before, it's a fairly good looking game for the time and it has a few concepts that, if done better, could have been interesting. If the developers had the right attitude, they could have at least made it fun and original. And just a bit more interesting. But sadly that isn't the case and the game is about as generic as you can expect. It really just is that simple. I give Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire a disappointing 2 out of 10. The game sucks. Thanks for watching guys. Stay tuned for my next review where we're going to be looking at the sequel, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, as well as many more retrospective video game reviews. Thanks for watching and God bless.